Hi, I'm Dave Kittredge, filmmaker in Los Angeles, and this is the OutCast presented by Outfest, where we have conversations with LGBT creators and allies to discuss their work, their inspirations, their passions, and the challenges of getting our authentic voices heard. Today, I am so thrilled to have the multi-hyphenate, award-winning actor, writer, director, producer, musician, almost any creative medium you can do with moving images or sound, he's done. Most notably, the off-Broadway then on-Broadway musical, which is also an acclaimed feature film which he directed, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, and last year he forged ahead in yet another medium, this one a 10-part narrative podcast called Anthem, Homunculus, which is amazing and got rave reviews and is now available on the podcast streaming service Luminary, John Cameron Mitchell.
Hello.
Joining us is, thank you for coming. Joining us is John's collaborator and co-composer on Anthem Homunculus, Bryan Weller.
Hello, thanks for having me.
And joining us as well is someone I know from 30 years ago at NYU, should I even say that? I don't even know, in a very different New York City, and has since gone on to edit amazing television and movies, such as Trick, Tarnation, Lackawanna Blues, Shadowboxer, The Savages, Kill the Messenger, We the Animals, as well as John Cameron Mitchell's Shortbus, and How to Talk to Girls at Parties, which I just saw for the first time the other day and was just completely blown away by. And now the podcast, Anthem Homunculus, Brian Cates.
Hi, thrilled that you have me here.
Thank you guys for doing this. I am so excited. So John, let me start with you. One of the most interesting things about you is how many different media you have attacked and kind of made your mark on. Everything from musicals and music to now a podcast, feature films. What's your kind of philosophy when you approach a project? What leads you to it?
I tend not to do too many things at the same time, certainly not the same things. Like I can't write two things or, direct two things. So I do complementary things. So I might be producing, for example, my brother's narrative podcast while preparing a pitch for, a TV project, while acting in Shrill, while writing songs with Bryan Weller, while mixing with Bryan Cates. So I love to do all kinds of stuff, use different parts of my brain and body. Performing, I didn't do for 15 years after Hedwig, but weirdly, Lena Dunham with a text brought me back to acting, and now the acting is for pure fun. Doing concert tours, the Origin of Love tour, and during COVID, writing songs with people remotely, with strangers, that I meet on the internet or on Grindr or whatever. It's like it's all possible.
And I want to know what kind of songs you write on Grindr.
Well, you meet people are on Grindr who with non-sexual facets of their relationship. Even today, I was mixing a song that I wrote with a guy in France who I met online, and also Amber Martin and I, who collaborate a lot, was sending me her songs with PJ Du Bois, who's been collaborating with her. He was in Shortbus, and
yeah, I remember. Yeah,
I love our circle of friends because Bryan Cates, who had never done a podcast, came in with these incredible skills to a world that didn't necessarily have those skills. And I knew that I had to have someone like him with his musical storytelling and technical skills to do it in Avid, the program Avid, and then we'd have to switch it over to Pro Tools. So we did a very film version. In effect, Anthem Homunculus that Bryan and I wrote is really as complex as Hedwig, but it's 5.5 hours of it and with no visuals. So we pushed the form in a more cinematic direction.
It's like the Berlin Alexanderplatz of podcasts. It really
right.
is.
And just as many people have seen it. Very few. Partly because we're on a subscription-based platform, Luminary, who've been great. But it'll always be there, and I'm sure we'll make it into another form, whether it's TV or theater. And actually, Bryan Weller is a longtime friend who was assisting me on How to Talk to Girls at Parties when we suddenly needed a songwriter for the punk band. And he, with Martin Tomlinson, created that band and the songs for it, as well as other songs, probably about 6 songs for How to Talk to Girls. Yeah. So when it was time to do Anthem, I didn't look too far. I was like, Bryan, let's Now let's be partners now instead of me hiring you. And it was a match made in heaven.
Bryan Weller, tell me how you initially met John and got involved with, I guess, at first, How to Talk to Girls at Parties and then Anthem Homunculus.
Yeah, I was living in Portland, Oregon, and in 2011, I was planning on moving to New York from Portland, where I'd been I'd been for 6 years, and I was about done with my time there. I'd graduated from college, and the reasons for being there seemed to be growing short at that time in my life. And I met John coincidentally just a month before moving, and it was at a Mattachine, which is his DJ night, and we hit it off. We had a nice evening together till the sun came up, and then I ended up moving and we became friends, and we were friends for years before any actual work came along. And I assisted on a TV project and on the Hedwig when John was on stage for Hedwig on Broadway. And then, I mean, it was just kind of gig after gig, and then the How to Talk to Girls, which the script had been being written and rewritten ever since I moved to New York. And so in 2015, it was finally time to produce it. So
I just have to say, when I knew that we were going to do this interview, I, did my research, like the diligent, whatever I am. And
a journalist.
I had not seen How to Talk to Girls at Parties.
Yeah.
It's on Amazon Prime. And I had been told by my film friends, you should see this. You're into because I tend to I'm a big fan of Southland Tales. Not many people are. I'm a big fan of movies like, Miami Vice. And there are movies that kind of push boundaries. It's basically me and Manola Dargis who like these movies. I think almost nobody else does. But this movie, it got kind of mixed reviews. And it came out in only a few theaters, and it just went away. And I was like, well, that's a shame, because I was looking forward to that. I sat down to watch it. It is a magical movie. It is now the epitome to me of the top 5 movies that were great and somehow bizarrely did not catch on. And it's this movie needs to be rediscovered. It's on Amazon Prime right now. Everybody, please go see this. How to Talk to Girls at Parties. It's based on a Neil Gaiman short story, and Brian Cates, you edited it, so it's you're all involved with this. I just want to talk about this for a moment because I was so taken with it.
Thank you. We felt it was our kind of YA sci-fi romance. It's punks falling in love with aliens in the 70s London, then it becomes punks versus aliens. But there's all of my stuff, I love playing with genre, having fun with music and comedy and animation, but there's always an emotional undercurrent and themes that punk is a good virus as opposed to the COVID, the one that makes you stronger and more empathetic and more just is how Anne, the star, looks at it. And we brought in friends like Nicole Kidman, Ruth Wilson, Matt Lucas.
Amazing. All of them.
Elle Fanning. They're all just so fun. We had a blast doing it. It's just not the time of the small film right now. The small, unusual film without, non-stop stars and very recognizable genre. And none of my films actually fit into any perfect genre. They maybe fit into 70s midnight movie vibe because that's how I grew up. But
that's the genius.
Yeah, I'm disappointed when people didn't take to it because maybe 10 years earlier people would have. Even a film like another crowd-pleasing film like Patty Cakes, that
Patty Cakes is great.
It's a great Napoleon Dynamite-y, fun outsider teenage comedy with music.
It got sold for a ton out of Sundance, and then it came out and nobody saw it. It was very, very odd. Yeah,
I loved it.
Yeah.
But it's not necessarily that time. People seem to have lost their imagination for small films, and they're not going to see them, so they're not being financed as certainly now they're not, but even last year. So I got disillusioned with, I still love film, of course, but get disillusioned in putting my energies in there. And, both Brian Cates and I have been foraying more into TV over the last, couple of years. Brian worked on The Plot Against America, and he worked on Treme before that with David Simon. And I'm developing 2 ideas for television, one of which is based on a book, a beautiful book, and the other is my own story about a circus that declares itself an independent nation. to avoid being raided by ice. So the land they're on, was missed in the Louisiana Purchase. So they just declare it, which feels very germane right now. So
It feels a little even cowgirls get the blues-ish.
yeah, but it's less kind of surreal and more like satire, a heartfelt satire, like something like Network or Wag the Dog or something, but the characters are not, the main characters are not just people that you really root for. So it's an idea of America. The metaphor of a circus for America seems like a better metaphor than most lately, of course.
So I understand that the genesis of the podcast that would become Anthem Homunculus was a sequel to Hedwig and the Angry Inch, which as a huge fan, I would love to see. But Bryan Weller, can you walk me through kind of like how it evolved from the sequel to Hedwig to being its own entity?
There was a beginning of the script as a Hedwig sequel, and that was the idea for that was going away, and the idea of sort of a more unveiled autobiographical story seemed to be the more salient idea in John's mind. And he had asked me in early 2016, after we had wrapped the shooting of How to Talk to Girls, to co-create it with him, to compose the music. He said that he wanted to sort of be at the helm of the lyrics, but he said the music was kind of my domain. And sometime in September, I think, we took that road trip and we went to Colorado and Kansas and Nebraska and kind of swung around to the West Coast, but spent most of the time in Kansas at Burroughs' house.
You wrote in William Burroughs' house?
I knocked on the door, actually, Burroughs'
Yes.
door, and Tom King, the caretaker, was like gruffly, "What the hell, what?" Apparently that happens once in a while. And I said, I'm writing a musical that might take place on this porch. And he's like, "All right, come in." I've never heard that one. And then Bryan and I bonded with Burroughs' partner, James Grauerholtz. And he invited us to write in Burroughs' house. I was in the garden and Bryan was in the living room writing the music.
That's amazing.
Yep.
And you got Ben Foster to play William S. Burroughs in the podcast.
Yes, we were looking around and I knew Ben. He had actually done an early readings of this piece, Anthem, when it was more of a Hedwig sequel, and he was playing Tommy, who by then was heroin addicted, fat, and faked his suicide. So
No! Well,
he
speaking on
wanted to
behalf
do
of all
that.
the fans, I hope for better for Tommy Gnosis. I really
I
do.
know. Well, he wanted to get back with Hedwig, so that was the easiest way, is to erase his fame. And Bryan, from way back, how do we meet Bryan Cates?
Through a mutual friend, John Bruce, also through Jim Lyons, who was Todd Haynes's both longtime editor and boyfriend at the time. I was an apprentice editor and sort of a quasi-post coordinator on Todd's movie Safe. That's how I knew Jim.
Which I was cast in but couldn't do because it was paid too little.
Which role? Is that my allowed to ask?
James LeGros role, actually.
Oh, wow.
Wow. That's something I actually did not know that. I thought I knew a lot about that movie, but I did not know that.
I love that movie. It's very COVID, isn't it? About Julianne Moore going into hiding, becoming allergic to everything.
It's like a COVID in all of our heads, really. It's like the mental and spiritual
The
COVID.
paranoia.
Yeah.
I read in the New York Times piece that Anthem Homunculus was recorded largely over 7 weeks in 2018, but the editing and mixing took an enormously longer time than that. Can you kind of speak to, the difference between and how this kind of was made in post, a lot of it?
Well, we kept writing. Or I should say, John kept writing based on what we built in the edit. So it was just an extremely malleable text. We knew what the story was. We knew where all the characters were going, what their arcs were, and for the most part, what the songs were. Although some songs were created in post, or not created in post, were commissioned in post, I should say, right, Bryan?
Somehow all these musicians were in the studio, and I said, well, we have this piece, let's just record it. And so that State Road's the one you're talking about, and
State Road.
also Toy Train from episode 2 was another one where I just said, we haven't rehearsed this, it's pretty simple, let's just record it, and then it ended up getting used. So yeah.
Oh yeah, and another big one is we included a new song for Patti LuPone,
Yeah.
which was based on a sketch.
If you got Patti LuPone, you might as well
Yeah, it was
her
a
another
score
song,
piece.
right?
Hey,
It was
I
a score
mean-
piece originally, so the music was there, and
Yeah, Bryan wrote a gorgeous. How do you want to explain it?
it's
Like
kind of like a
jazz,
Coltrane like ballad.
but he slowed it down to a ballad's tempo.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh,
and
right, yeah.
they
We-
wrote lyrics.
Yeah, there were a bunch of different versions. We did kind of a free jazz version of it too. I just had the band just do all kinds of stuff. So there were options.
The themes were always in the original script, but focusing them and giving them the right emphasis was not necessarily known until we started cutting and building the show. So in this case, yeah, an entire new sequence with 3 scenes and a new musical number were invented after we were editing. And we had a day with Patty in August, and she came in and recorded the song, recorded the scenes. So yeah, extreme malleability and creativity in the writing process, which included the songwriting process.
If you haven't heard it, the main character, Kian, he's an unreliable narrator. He has a brain tumor, and he kind of goes in and out of consciousness, in and out of various states, which may or may not exist. And ostensibly, we're hearing his podcast, which he is live streaming to raise money to remove his brain tumor, to get his brain tumor removed. But it's not the podcast, because we slipstream into his past, into alternate dimensions, into planets made of meat. It's like all sorts of stuff. Yeah, for instance. And the unreliable narrator, it requires a lot of sound effects. It requires a lot of different treatments of sound. How much of that, Bryan, did you kind of put in the cut before it was kind of handed off into Pro Tools?
Good question. That was the joy of it. I mean, I did not do it alone by any means. It's sort of like we had 2 picture editors, even though there was no picture, and the other one was Ali Muni. And we did a large amount of this sort of formatting and structuring of the sound design with the help of Kate Belinsky, who built a lot of backgrounds that she gave to us for the planets and such. But a lot of the nitty-gritty toilets and footsteps and wind and birds. And, Ali and I would build those in the Avid because that's all you got. Like, we're very...
we didn't use much Foley, which for those who don't know, that's when Foley artist goes into a studio and makes the crunching footsteps and the touching the glass and all of those things. That's original sound that we make, ourselves. But they used a lot of library stuff.
Yeah.
And we never ended up going into Foley, I don't believe. I had to make a triple heartbeat, which was not in a library because the homunculus has 3 hearts or 2 hearts. So I just made a sound I used to make as a kid to horror movie sound, which was...
Oh, wow. That's so...
But then I made it into a triple one, so it's... And then Bryan would make it more bassy, and Greg Switlowski, our supervising sound designer, I guess, would do other things to it and add elements. So we really had a team, edit and sound team of about
5
also people.
Steve
plus,
Bone, Tim Korn, Eric Hirsch.
Yeah.
Also,
along with 3 great assistants doing a hell of a lot of work. So it was kind of like making a really small film. And we probably did it more expensively than most because we came from the film side, and sometimes these narrative podcasts have one person doing it all, including recording and even composing. So meanwhile, Bryan Weller, maybe you could tell what you were doing while we were recording actors and starting the edit.
Well, I think the whole recording process started with our laying down basic tracks, which was just the sort of bare bones band, and then we laid down some vocals for Cynthia Erivo and Nakane, and you, possibly John, in that period. And then over the following months, while you were all both recording dialogue and then beginning the edit assemblies and making decisions in that, I was overdubbing the basic tracks of the music with horns and string orchestras and singers and all kinds of other bells and whistles, as well as going into a smaller studio to record all the score, which was also fun. And we were all...
It was a ton of music.
Yeah. I mean, with that, with score in particular, that was sort of a process of finding the way, but I had a great time with... We had a great studio in Red Hook called Atomic Sound, which had a bunch of isolation booths, so every separate element of the songs we could kind of break apart, just completely isolated from the rest, and you repurpose for different parts of the entire story, different score cues. It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot in that, and I had a lot of fun.
Which I love too, because it was extremely plastic and malleable. So I would have all these stems, and we would need them because we would be rewriting the script literally every day. Because when you don't have picture to sync to,
you're more flexibility.
You can be flexible. You can be inventive, and we sort of were not originated, but we were a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of working by ourselves at home and sending things and never seeing each other, because we were all at home. We never really had an editing room other than my dining room table, and John was on tour doing the Origin of Love show. You were in South Korea, I think. You were in Australia, and the work continued. He would write at night, which was the opposite time in New York, and he would send me files, and I would build in dialogue, and then the assistant would string them out and add them to the bank of other dialogue, like a constantly growing database of versions of lines.
Because there's a lot of re-recording you need to do for story. When you have a film, you tend to have more time with the script, and then you shoot the film and you improvise and things happen on set, and then you do what's called ADR, which is looping, when someone comes in and does some more sound to fix the sound. But in our case, we were re-recording constantly to fix things and clarify story. And I had my own mic, and could do that at home with a pillow in front of me, or towel over my head. And then if we had Glenn Close or Patti LuPone who had to do a line, they would gamely shout into their iPhone with a towel over their head and just email it. And then we drop it in the mix,
For sound quality.
Oh, that's magical, though.
It could often work.
One of the big questions I did have, which you touched on, is when I was listening to it, because it sounds so tight, how much of this script was really kind of on the page when you started it, and how much of it developed during the recording and during the post-production?
I would say that 85% was on the page. When I work with actors, I often encourage them to paraphrase their lines and make them more comfortable in their mouth, which I've always done, especially starting with Shortbus. And we had very experienced actors who take to the audio acting very quickly. I mean, there's not a big shift in the kind of acting. So we had super professional people, Cynthia Erivo, Dennis O'Hare, Marion Cotillard did her doctor bit on, remotely from a studio in Paris. Laurie Anderson, the queen of sound. We're like, who plays the homunculus? Who plays Keane's tumor? And
oh my God, that was so perfect.
I
That
know.
was so perfect. I
Laurie
just saw
Anderson.
her before the quarantine. I just saw her at the Walt Disney Concert Hall, 3 months ago or whenever she was there. She is still magical.
Brilliant.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Amazing.
I mean, it was a completely dynamic and hypnotic experience, as is almost everything I've ever seen her do. I mean, if by the way, if you guys out there are not familiar with Laurie Anderson, go to YouTube.
And just watch Superman. And then
watch
go
Oh
from
Superman.
There.
It's amazing. Oh Superman is the most unlikely top 10 hit, I think, in history.
I know, next to that nun who sang the Lord's Prayer. It's incredible, but it's absolutely hypnotic visually and sound-wise. And she was an innovator in many ways. She and Yoko Ono, I think, are undersung, as great innovators in all kinds of art. And she remains, a beautiful and wonderfully kind person.
Oh, that's so good to hear.
Yeah, she took Bryan and I under her wings and was just so generous and, there for us and thrilled by the final effect. We did a Anthem Homunculus marathon listening party at IFC Cinema where, we did all 10 episodes with breaks and dinner breaks and, blankets and gift bags.
And gorgeous animations, yeah.
Yeah, oh, yes. Our friend Michael Zumbrun did some incredible visuals with using program, very abstract. And I've done it in other cities. I was about to do it in LA when it shut down. But she was there with Hal Wilner, who's a legendary musical figure, was the Saturday Night Live music supervisor when they would, in
He just passed on.
70s and 80s when he just passed on because of COVID.
Yeah.
It was,
R.I.P.
horrible. I managed to have a small friendship with him, and he recorded me doing a T-Rex song for his tribute album that's coming out soon.
Which one?
I think it's like something headed hipsters. What's that line from Ginsberg? Like tornado headed hipsters. But like my song comes after U2 with Elton John.
Wow.
Doing Bang a Gong. But it's an incredible lineup. But these are the people who are in New York. This is the good New York, creating something new. I'm still feeling a lot of energy even in this COVID time because people are, I've been writing songs with people remotely and mixing and, want to come out with a little EP for to benefit COVID charities of COVID anthems maybe. But our anthem series will hopefully continue. Each season will be a completely different musical by different people.
Oh, wow.
So people are pitching us, not as many as I'd like. We haven't found our perfect candidate yet, but it's a form that, should continue. And obviously with the COVID thing, it's much more popular just because you can do it safely.
Want to know more about Outfest? Of course you do. You're listening to this podcast. Outfest is the only LGBTQIA arts, media, and entertainment nonprofit organization in the world whose programs empower artists, communities, and filmmakers alike to transform the world through their stories, while also supporting the entire life cycle of their career from outset to legacy. And what that means is, it is one of the largest LGBT film festivals in the world and one of the largest film festivals in North America. Also, Outfest has a tremendous number of programs for young filmmakers, as well as archivists preserving gay stories for all time. It is a truly outstanding organization, and especially right now, we would love your help. Please go to outfest.org and learn how you can become a member of this fantastic organization. Right now during COVID, I know all of my creative friends are kind of reaching out, checking in on each other, trying to figure out a way to kind of take this time to get stuff done, because most creatives I know, including myself, you're in normal times before this whole thing, it's like, oh, if only I had the time to do this, only if I only had the time to do whatever. A lot of people, including myself, it's difficult. It's really difficult because there's a pallor of stress, there's a pallor of uncertainty underneath all of it. And most of the conversations I've been having with friends is just like, don't beat yourself up, just do what you can.
Yeah, at first I was like, I've got to be productive, and then I just cooled out, cooked, got healthy, lost 7 pounds.
Ooh, congrats.
Good work, John.
Belly.
They weren't there to lose.
No, but doing things I don't usually do that I knew I would love to, like cook. And then the other stuff came, I didn't push myself. Brian Cates has a full job right now.
Yeah, I'm editing a documentary right now, so I feel like time is speeding by because I do want to do those other things, and I'm anxious, obviously, and I'm sad about the state of the country, particularly, but the world. And there's no time in a way, so I'm trying to be gentle with myself. I'm trying to watch some movies that are on my list to check off, like Corel. I'd never seen. I watched it last night.
Oh,
amazing!
It's on Criterion Channel, I think.
I know
yeah.
It is. That was that's mandatory. Jesus.
Bryan Weller, how are you kind of getting through this period?
Well, for the start of it, I was in Seattle because my father had open heart surgery, coincidentally right when it was all really heating up. So it was a very strange. I think a lot of my stress was sort of centered around that, and I was concerned about infecting him because back then there was no stay-at-home order, even though Seattle was the epicenter. Mm-hmm. And right around the time I was finally going to get back to New York, they switched, and New York became the epicenter, so that was very strange. But
do you feel responsible
for switching them? Yeah, it's everywhere I've been. It follows. I'm the cause. But
where are you now?
I'm in New York. I'm in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. But all my stuff was in New York. So when I got back, I kind of had this release. I was recording a ton of music. I think in a way, the productivity was a means to stave off a kind of desolation, or it became that.
Yeah.
Sort of
Right.
like having something at the end of every day sort of was the token that the day existed and was worthwhile. And if I didn't have that, then I would become, like, the evening would be very antsy and stressed out.
Anxious.
Yeah.
So I've lost a little steam on that, and I guess I would, that my answer to your question of how to go about it would be, in some ways, I feel that it's similar to any other time in that one has spurts of energy, and so a lot of people may have come into the whole quarantine thing slightly different than me without having the father health issue and the change of location factor. But my hope is that as this continues, that everyone's energy can rise, like the things that they want to do, they'll find the energy. Maybe when the sun comes out, instead of being able to go out with a bunch of people into the park, they can take that vitamin D and put it into the project they always wanted to make.
Or you could do what I did this morning and watch a lot of YouTubes about various bugs fighting in a terrarium.
That's productive.
Murder
too.
locusts?
Yes. I mean, the
Oh my
mantis
God.
versus the murder hornet was breathtaking. It was very dramatic.
You guys touched on something that I wanted to ask about, especially with regard to this podcast, and it's basically how much personal influence goes into this. And I'd read enough, kind of, researching this, to know, John, that a lot of this came from personal loss that you were coping with, or either far back or more recent. Can you kind of touch on what role your own personal influence and working out stuff that you're working on goes into your work?
It's just the best way to deal with stuff, is creativity. And it's actually the only antidepressant I know is actually making something, using your imagination to make something. Is way better than a pill. We all need a pill at times, but that's in order to get to the place of imaginative productivity, not just productivity, but solving things with your imagination. And, I lost my boyfriend in 2004, who was the bass player in Stephen Trask's band where we developed Hedwig, and he had an addiction problem. I lost my brother when I was 14. I lost, my father more recently, but that's more of a natural thing. But, death was always my companion. And even as a kid, I was very aware of mortality. And, at 20, my favorite playwright was Beckett. So it's just there. But Beckett's way of laughing into the void was also very useful to me. So the Hedwig sequel really came out of dealing with Jack's death through the voice of Hedwig, which seemed a convenient mouthpiece, but she has her own baggage. So I removed her from the story about someone doing a crowdfunding telethon. I removed her like a tumor, and the character became me. But a version of me, what would I be like if I'd never left my small town? So it's a kind of alternate autobiography. It's real up to maybe 18, and then everything after that is invented. But pretty much all the characters are based on people in my life. Glenn Close plays my mom. Dennis O'Hare's my dad. Nakane, who is a incredible South African music person. It's Nakhane. He has an amazing song with Anoni called New Brighton. Check that out. But he's I met him on Instagram. I heard about a film he was in, couldn't get through to him, heard his music, thought it was brilliant, his amazing voice, and DM'd him on Instagram, and he said, I was just looking at Shortbus. So it's a small queer world.
And let's just talk about Shortbus for a moment, because we haven't yet. Brian Cates, you edited Shortbus. I know people
Best
who are
job
in
of my life.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, one of the most profound experiences, absolutely.
It came about, and you guys can talk about this, but it came about in a very unconventional way. You put an ad, John, correct, in the paper?
Yes. Well, the paper.
Which paper? Was it the Village Voice?
It was
a
Voice. I used a few. Remember the L? You were
yes.
in New York. The
yes.
L, that was the Williamsburg hipster paper. I sort of reached out to all the usual suspects, mostly in New York. I think we did LA Weekly too. I just did cold emails and said, look, I'm doing this thing. You want to write about it, to publicize my audition process, which is anyone could send in a tape. It was VHS at the time. And to audition is to talk about an emotional sexual experience, so that, right away we knew we weren't just making porn, which tends to be drained of emotion and often formalized the way Hollywood, the way you have sex is in porn is often very standardized. You do this, then you do that, and then you come on someone's face, and then, and then the woman does a fake orgasm if it's a woman. So this was a reaction to porn, but also a reaction to other films, some of which were great, like Fat Girl came out of France, Battle in Heaven came out of Mexico, Brown Bunny came out of America. Mm-hmm. For better or worse, these films were using unsimulated sex. It all tended to be very grim, humorless, and depressing, which, of course, sex can be connected to those things. They were valid, and I think Fat Girl is brilliant. But others were just dull to me. And it was our version of a radical fairy-inspired scene. Our friend Stephen Kent Jusick, who ran the Mix Experimental Film Festival, used to have something called Cine Salon, like as in cinephile. And he would show 60mm films at his house, and there would be vegetarian food and pot brownies, and then there would be sometimes sex. And he encouraged it to be, in that public living room rather than hiding out in the bathroom or whatever. And it was fascinating to me that all of these things, food, art, sex, were equivalent and available at the same place. So that led to Shortbus, the salon where Justin Vivian Bond is the mistress, of the scene. And it was shot at a place called Dumba, which was traditionally a queer kind of arts collective in Dumbo, where at the time we were shooting, it was in its last legs. It was often women of color living there, and many of them ended up in the film. And it was our Radical Fairy friends, and my friend James Coppola was the Sextras coordinator, and I was challenged to join in the orgy because so I can be my socialist, one of the folks,
as one is,
and I was told that I would either have to get fucked up the ass or eat pussy. And I chose the latter, and it was one of the people who lived at Dumba, and she was delicious.
2 takes.
And one of her songs ended up in the soundtrack. So it was a group effort, everyone's work.
It's a group sex effort.
From pussy to music, it was all welcome, and it was a great experience, which probably couldn't be done today because we've regressed in some ways. And I think the objections might come from the left rather than the right, which is how it was before. Like the Christians were freaked out. But now if I did it, it's like there might be an objection, like how can you, a white cis male, make an Asian woman come in front of you? It's a violation. There's a lot of fear about violation, and it all comes from the same Puritan source, right or left. We're all scared of sex in our country. It's just kind of shifted into sex equals abuse, to some, and consent issues become, panicky, which understandably, there's plenty of violation to talk about, but it can sometimes lead to a overly cautious, no one can have sex now because someone's being violated.
Well, whenever you meld sex with intimacy, I mean, that's basically nitroglycerin for a lot of people. I mean, it really kind of hits very, very centrally, and a lot of people get very, scared, intimidated. And Shortbus is really, I mean, it does have actual sex in it, but it's an examination of intimacy, which is why I think it's so, and with a spiritual bent, like all of your work, which is why it's so fascinating.
Oh, Frank DeMarco, my longtime cinematographer, we really, we love film, and there was the last moment of film, actual celluloid being used, and I needed to do a lot of long takes because there was a lot of improv involved. And when you have a 60mm camera, you can get a 20-minute mag on the camera, 20-minute take. for lighter than you would a 35 millimeter camera. So a lot of digital formats can go longer, but you're not really going to go past 20 minutes.
You can also burn a lot of film waiting for an orgasm.
Yes, we did do that a lot.
So wait, but what was it like cutting this? I mean, I assume that the ratio of what was used to unused, the shooting ratio, as you call it, it was very high compared to most narrative.
It was massive, and that's why it was so profound for me, because I didn't feel like I didn't have the skills to do it, and I had to learn by doing it. I mean, now that I've worked in TV more, where sometimes you're shooting 3 cameras all day long, and you have to give them an assembly 2 days after they finish shooting. I've honed better skills at knowing how to be efficient that way, but at that time, it was new to me. So the fact that it was a movie being made with friends, and it felt personal because I was ferry adjacent, and John was my friend, and it was a topic I loved, and the tone, it was a musical, like all of those things were sort of neutralizing to let me accept the challenge ahead of me. But it was very hard. I mean, also part of it was the trust. I could tell John, well, you shot the lesbian room scene is 4 hours of footage, and it's a 10-minute scene, and, it's going to take, a week and a half just to manage it. And John was fine with that. I mean,
I was just shocked that because of the way we were shooting, many of the actors were not very professional or experienced, and so I allowed them much more leeway in their dialogue and paraphrasing, which made them better, but that meant we had to shoot a hell of a lot. And I was and I also told them, no, don't worry about continuity, meaning, they would drink on a certain line in one take and then not drink on the second take, and that's hard to edit if you're not doing the same thing, which is why TV is very assiduous about continuity, because they have to move so quickly in their editings.
But that was the fun part about editing it, because you can problem solve all of those things.
I thought we were going to have to jump cut. Jump cut means, you jump ahead a few seconds and people, aren't doing the exact same thing. But he did much less jump cutting than I expected, because he's so good. He found the cut points that made it seem continuous, and we use the jump cut just for special occasions, because you can overdo it.
Right.
Unless you're Lars von Trier, who does it nonstop and does it well.
But it was also about the way it was shot, because Frankie would shoot different kinds of sizes and different kinds of coverage. So, in a very kind of fluid way, as they would feel their way through the scene. It wasn't only the actors learning what it was about, it was Frankie and it was John. So the footage would feel different ways throughout the day, and that means it was cuttable. It wasn't the same. I wasn't getting the same static version of a shot with different words. I was getting all sorts of different stuff.
Yeah,
like a panoply of stuff.
He had a ton of possibilities. And musically, that was another example of people doing different hats. Like my assistant, Louis Schwadron, is a consummate arranger and composer, and he took a song written by someone else that Justin Bond sings at the end. We all get it in the end, and did this incredible orchestration that became score as well. And he was my assistant, trying to find female condoms, for certain safety scenes. We weren't supposed to be giving, Cialis out, because that's like a insurance issue, but the actors were, taking it on their own at times.
They take care of themselves, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I have to ask you about Hedwig and kind of how that came about, because that was your gigantic break. You started out as an actor. I assume you were in Chicago, then you were in Big River on Broadway.
Yeah.
And then you spent, I think, a fair amount of time in LA. You were in the cult classic Paul Michael Glaser film, Band of the Hand, which is, by the way, it's not a good movie, but it's a lot better than you'd expect. It's a lot more fun.
Yeah.
It had a
I
kind
think
of a,
so.
It's a fun movie. Tell me about the pivot from acting and doing TV and all that stuff to meeting Stephen Trask and kind of like developing Hedwig into the gigantic icon thing that it is now.
I really was bored. I was very spoiled in some ways, because I was working with amazing writers at times, including John Guare, Larry Kramer, Keith Radine. I did a lot of especially great theater. The TV and film tended to be more money stuff and more fun, like MacGyver and Band of the Hand and head of the class or whatever in commercials, and I survived doing the voice of the Dunkaroos animated cartoon kangaroo. How do you do your Dunkaroos? You know, that kind of thing.
Oh my
which
God.
I hear they're bringing back.
Yeah. I grew up with that, John.
You know, when I mention that, people are more excited than any of my Tony Award-winning work. They're like, Dunkaroos, why didn't you tell me? And in Australia, too, with my terrible Australian accent. I had a good time as an actor, but was also getting a little bored. I'd do a Secret Garden, which I enjoyed, but for a year it wasn't enjoyable after a while, and I wasn't able to improvise. And I wanted to get more rock and roll. I wanted to learn about the freedom of ad-libbing and letting things happen in the moment, which I admired in stand-up comedians, drag queens, and punk rockers. So I thought, with Stephen Trask, let's write something that involves stand-up comedy, drag, punk rock, combined with, you know, the storytelling tightness of a Broadway show like Gypsy. And let's throw in animation and incredible, you know, costume and wigs. And, oh, you do wigs? You know, you work at Kim's Videos? Give me a wig, you know. And Madonna's stylist, Ariane Phillips, you want to do this? Great. You know, it's, to me, it's like that Stone Soup story. I think it was Tom Sawyer, you know, he's cooking a stone and people are like, what is that? It's a stone soup. What the hell? Well, I've got some carrots. Let me add that. And he's like, great. You know, and then of course it becomes a real soup with everybody's additions. And I love that way of working. And that's how I'm working, writing songs right now, you know, under lockdown. So give me what you got. And I'm much more excited in a hungry, talented person than an established fart, no matter how talented, because they're willing to take a risk. And Kate's learned from Shortbus and then teaches me things on how to talk to girls, or Anthem. And I really can't think of a better editor ever, you know, that I've had any contact with. We work with the best producer, which is Howard Gertler, who made How to Survive a Plague and Crip Camp too. Bryan Weller does comic books. He writes novels. I didn't know his music as much until he fell into writing for me. And then I think he's a true musical genius, can work in any form. So to me, I love to be the place where people can learn and surprise themselves and me. I met a guy in Grindr, Michael Zumbrun, who did the projections for the Origin of Love tour and the Anthem, you know, abstract visuals for the marathon, and did a little thing for me at Joe's Pub. And I challenged him. I'm like, can you try that? I've never done it. Let's do it. And that is my way of working forever. And I also love to be the helper to someone else's project. I love to direct other people's stuff or act in other people's stuff, like Shrill, you know, on Hulu.
You were so evil on that show.
I'm an evil queen, my worst gay nightmare, and it pays my bills and takes care of my mom's health care, and I love it.
And of course, you know, Hedwig has the Criterion treatment. What did you think when you heard that it was going to get the Criterion Collection treatment?
Well, Hedwig has always clung on by broken Lee press-ons, even off Broadway. The film was a flop. People found it on DVD.
But everyone has seen it. Everyone I know has seen this film at least once, mostly multiple
and we
times.
never saw a cent. You know, it's just funny. You know, we got paid to make it, but we never, you know, there was no residuals or
Hollywood accounting
upside at the end. No, yeah, it's Hollywood accounting. It's not enough money involved to actually sue them, because you'd probably lose money if you sued. But that's okay. You know, it's like the personal dividends, the creative ones are way more than the money. And then when we got to Broadway, I did make some money replacing myself. I came in later in the run. And we'll hopefully do it in West End if theater isn't canceled forever. And to me, the joy of doing something new always outweighs the less lucrativeness of being ahead of your time. Shortbus certainly didn't make a lot of money, but a lot of people saw it and affected them strongly too.
Yeah.
You know, it's not really available now. We're hoping that the great Criterion will, you know, who has been kindly making noises and loves Shortbus, you know, making noises about doing that, will
that
turn
would be
it.
so great.
Yeah, because they did an incredible job for Hedwig, closely involved with me and Steven and our collaborators to make a box set for the ages, and I can die safely knowing that Hedwig will live, you know, beyond us. And we hope to do the same for Shortbus.
I read a rumor once. Was it true that you wanted to use a different song for the end of Hedwig and you couldn't get the rights?
Yeah, when we were off Broadway, or off, really, at a club called Fez, which was a cabaret space, the ending was a German translation of You Light Up My Life, which was the biggest song of the 70s. You light up my life.
It was transcendent.
Joseph Brooks, right?
Joe Brooks wrote it. Debbie Boone sang it. It was huge. And Joe reviewed Hedwig and said we were not wholesome enough.
Which is very ironic considering how Mr. Brooks ended up.
That's right. He was indicted in 90 counts of rape and sexual assault and killed himself to avoid prosecution.
Yeah.
So let that be, if anyone else fucks with Hedwig, just know there is a curse. And of course, Stephen was much more interested in an original song for the finale and came up with Midnight Radio literally in one night right before our dress rehearsal, and it was insanely good.
I can honestly say when I saw it 3 times. The first time I saw at the end with Midnight Radio and, Tommy came out, I just started crying. And it was just one of those moments, one of those magical moments you have with any creative work that happens once, I don't know, in a year, 2 years, whatever.
And that moment could never happen in the film because in the play, I, in effect, impersonate all the characters. She rips her drag off in frustration during a song. The way I saw Mistress Formica do something similar at Squeezebox, which was the rock and roll drag club that Hedwig was spawned from, and where I learned from all these incredible queens. She rips it off, and the stage goes dark, and then the Tommy song begins, and she kind of rises into the light as Tommy. And, the whole metaphor of we are two halves of one kind of becomes true, and she becomes both of them, and then is a kind of unified creature singing Midnight Radio of a.
She's a hybrid, really.
Right.
Yeah.
She's a hybrid, and she's a gender of one. I never think of the story or the character as a trans story because she was forced into this operation for the wrong reasons. And in fact, a kind of a victim of the binarchy, which is a term I use in the Origin of Love tour. And it's like, you have to be this if you're a man, and if you're not a man, then you have to be that. You have to be the woman that we've decided you are, and we're going to cut off your penis, and all those things that the patriarchy and the binarchy and the world wants you to be to fit into the binary. And she says, no, I'm a gender of one. And at the end, she has to go through a war to find a wholeness. And then she walks out of our lives into her new life naked, saying, this is me, the angry inch and all. This is what I am, and it's beautiful.
It is beautiful. And the way that you chose to end the film, because in a way, unlike theater, film literalizes everything. Like, you're seeing it on the screen, and it is very literal as compared to theater when everyone's kind of in a communal agreement that, okay, we're going to see this thing, but we're in a theater. In a film, you have to rethink it, and the way you rethought it for the film is really brilliant.
Yeah, we took the risk that paid off of having another actor playing Tommy. And, me kissing myself would have just been too conceptual. Even if I gained 40 pounds for one of the roles, which is the only way I could have got an Oscar. And of course, Hedwig, the world wasn't ready for Hedwig at the time, let's say the mainstream world. And we never would have been up for an Oscar then or on Broadway.
But you're up for a Golden Globe, and you came in that wonderful suit.
Yes, that was an unexpected thing that we were nominated for the Golden Globes. But, it was a kind of, freak vote. But we don't mind. It's like when you do some different stuff, Safe is never going to be up for an Oscar, and Julianne Moore and Todd Haynes, and should have been.
Right.
But we, who make things know that awards, are fake. They're wonderful commercials to help other people hear about things. They don't mean they're the best films. It's not always the best performance. It's the one with a money campaign behind it.
But things are turning. Parasite, which is a South Korean film which changes tone radically in the middle and talks about income inequality, won Best Picture.
Yes, and Moonlight won, which never would have got close to that 5 years before. And I think that has a lot to do with the membership of the Academy, which is changing. You know, it's just less commercial. So all the commercial people are like, maybe we should make a category for shitty films. Remember they were going to do that last year?
They weren't going to call
them
it that.
shitty. They called them commercial. I don't know. What were they going to call that?
Most popular or something?
Most popular. But that's
Popular, yeah.
popular, like high school. She's the most popular.
It's so they can give Marvel movies Oscars.
I know. They were desperate to get the Marvel movies in there, with most, 90% of which are drivel. And I loved Marvel as a kid. It's not superheroes I hate. It's just the stupidity of having to sell these things in China and such, so they remove anything interesting. Not that I hate China. I am no Trump. But, when you go lowest common denominator, things suffer. And there is a joy that Hedwig, which never sanded off its corners, found its way in Korea and Japan, and eventually will be in China. Didn't pass the censor this time around, but, a lot of people there want to do it. And it's been running in Korea for 15 years. I might even go out and do a benefit, because the company that has been doing it is threatened by the COVID shutdown, and I might go out and do some benefit concerts there. But Bryan and I have performed for 10,000 people in Seoul, doing Hedwig shows.
That's so fantastic. I want to know what advice you have for filmmakers or content creators, each of you, except go make that film or movie or whatever. Like, if you take that out, just do it advice, what advice do you have?
Well, the just do it is the best, of course. And I've never been a film school person. Tell me if I'm right, Brian Cates, but oftentimes people who did go to film school said the best thing about it was meeting the other people that they would continue to work with.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But for me, it was also about, I was always afraid of equipment unless it was post-production equipment. I was afraid of light meters and lenses and being outside and tripods, but I wanted a flatbed. I wanted film. But I ate up the theory. So cinema studies for me was only accessible through the curation of great professors. And film school to me validated the entire world of theory that was just too complicated and too foreign for me to get into by myself.
I have no formal art education in any medium, so my advice might be a little bit more abstract, but it was something along the lines of make sure that you're doing it for yourself and right with yourself, as in, if you're just waiting for the right connections, or if all the networking is solely to get a leg up, then I don't know. But if you're doing it for yourself, if you're making the stuff in your bedroom, or if you have the initiative solely because you have that passion, then I feel when the opportunity comes, whether you're networking or whether it falls in your lap or whatever the path may be for you, I think you'll be all the more ready, and the work will be all the better once it starts flowing in that context. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what you're talking about is kind of like making stuff from a personal place, and trying to make it real for you, regardless of kind of how it plays out. And I think that, at least from John's work that I've seen, the one thing that runs through it all is this element of spirituality, and it's an element of togetherness, that we're all one. And these are very powerful concepts, and very difficult to communicate. And I think that, one of the reasons that, your work is so interesting is that you do communicate it in these really unique and interesting ways. And Anthem Homunculus is absolutely a great example of it.
Thank you. I love a blowjob in midday. I can't wait for real blowjobs.
Well, I can say on behalf of everyone who listens to Anthem Homunculus or kind of experiences this work, we're all lucky to have the work.
Yeah, and this lockdown is hopefully focusing. I mean, there's people who are just moment to moment trying to survive, and we're lucky enough that we can work and do stuff and have a moment to breathe and think. But don't squander that time, to find out what is important to your life, to the country, to all of our futures. This is a landmark year for many people and for our country, and it's, what's going to happen electorally, economically, artistically, will resonate for the next decades, and it's a very, very powerful time #unprecedented time.
It has been so great having you guys on here. Thank you so much, John Cameron Mitchell, Brian Cates, and Bryan Weller. The podcast is Anthem, Homunculus. It is really amazing, and you should go check it out. Thank you so much for being here on the podcast with me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
And this has been the OutCast, presented by Outfest. For more, go to outfest.org/theoutcast. The OutCast is executive produced by Ismail El Sharif and Alan Koenigsberg. Special thanks to Damian Navarro and the entire Outfest team. Music by West One Music Group. For more information about Outfest, the film festival, the programs, and all the ways that you can help support LGBT voices, go to outfest.org. The OutCast is a production of Milton Ventures Media and Triple Fire Productions. I'm Dave Kittredge. Thank you so much for listening, and catch you next time.